I'm Toby Capwell. I'm a specialist in medieval and Renaissance arms and armor, warfare, knighthood, related subjects. I'm also curator of arms and armor at the Wallace collection in London. And I'm really excited about today. My whole life, professional life, kind of revolves around this subject. And I'm constantly encountering the fact that this is a subject replete with all kinds of myths and misconceptions. It feels like almost every day I'm reminded that history is not about what happened. It's about what we wish had happened, how we would like it to have been. We want our history to be emotionally or intellectually satisfying. And that leads us to twist it and change it around and emphasize certain aspects and downplay others. And I'm fascinated by that process. But I also want to know what really happened. I want to know more about people's lives in the Middle Ages, in the Renaissance. So I work very hard to try and cut through and sort out, mythologizing from the real hard evidence. And that can actually be very difficult sometimes. So when Todd called me for this, when he's putting this team together to do this experiment, I was really excited by that. But I also made the point that I think we need to be very specific about a particular moment in history that we're trying to explore. The longbow is an ancient weapon. The Vikings had longbows, or they were used all the way through the Middle Ages. They were used into the 16th century. So the generic issue of longbow shooting versus armor needs to be specific. And I said that I thought we should focus on the Battle of Agincourt and that specific context because it's the best known in a way, but it's also the most misunderstood. It's also the battle and the period that is most kind of loaded politically and socially and culturally. So it's particularly hard for us to separate the myth and the misconception from what really did happen. But we know more about what actually did happen at Agincourt now in the benefit of research that's occurred over the last 100 years or so. The Battle of Agincourt took place on the 25th of October, 1415. It was organized as part of a campaign for King Henry V invading France. He invaded first and took over the port city of Harfleur in Normandy before moving east across northern France, finally bringing the French to battle at Agincourt in the Pas de Calais. The myth of the Battle of Agincourt is the setup that an army of stout English archers defeated a much larger force of French knights in a spectacular triumph over the odds. And that's the appealing myth that casts this event as a kind of class war of commons versus aristocracy that appeals to the modern mind, but that's not what happened at the battle. Henry V certainly had a lot of archers. The army that he had on the day was 4 archers to every 1 man-at-arms. Henry V had knights, though, too, 1,500 knights and men-at-arms, and that's a crucial point that people often forget about. But he did have this massive number of archers, 7,000 archers and 1,500 fully armed knights. And he was arrayed against a French army that was all men-at-arms. The French had quite a lot of archers who were there on the day, but they were not engaged, so they do not matter. Superior numbers doesn't matter when not all of them engage with the enemy. And what we're concerned with was who was actually doing the fighting. And on the French side, that was around 10 to 12,000 fully armed knights. We know less about the precise makeup of the French army because the records don't all survive in the way they do in England. But we can look at past precedent. What were the largest French armies in the last 20 years that the French were capable of fielding? And they were never much bigger than around 14,000 men in total. So the French had more people probably at Agincourt, but not overwhelming, massive odds. And that's an important point. The shooting did matter on the day, but the sources suggest, certainly to me, that it was only one part of the equation. And we need experimentally to understand more about how medieval English archery actually works, and to try and rebalance our understanding of this battle. The example of the collision and the conflict in everybody's minds about this battle between myth and misconception and facts is, for example, the very popular idea that the English shot up in the air. There's all this very dramatic Hollywood footage of archers aiming up in the air and launching arrows high in the air so that they drop down at long range on the enemy. And that's visually appealing in a film, and the image of a rain of arrows is poetic and everything, but it's not what happened. We have visual sources of the time, pictorial art, which gives us a sense of what these people looked like and how they shot. They're shooting straight, not up in the air. We have then the written accounts. There are both eyewitness accounts on the English side and on the French side, and lots of them. And then there are official histories, which are based on interviews with eyewitnesses, and some of them are more reliable than others. The diversity of sources gives us a better chance of balancing out for bias and secondhand knowledge and stuff like that. And then we have the material surviving. There's armor from this period surviving, and enough of it that we can get a good sense of the metallurgy, the construction, the way it's designed. And you combine all those different sources together, written, material, and pictorial, and you start to get a lot closer. That's the real evidence, not the Laurence Olivier film. You can take all those different types of evidence and put them together really carefully. But until you get out into the world and do something physical, there's a piece missing. You know, what we're doing today is taking all of that study and seeing what the real physical world has to say about it. You know, how does it actually play out? What happens when that arrow hits that breastplate? What does it sound like? And how much variation in there? What is the reality of it? That's the final piece of this whole puzzle, and that fills out our ability to imagine the situation of the battle. You know, the results, what you learn, is only worth as much as the quality of your setup. And Todd is, I think, in a especially good position with everybody who's helping today to set up conditions that are faithful as far as is practical.